Khordah Avesta, Preface to the 11th edition. The last edition of this book was published in January 1926. Since then, various small Avesta prayer books were published by cheap-rate dealers. Nevertheless, there was demand, as usual, for the present edition make by the co-religionists, which proves still the high degree of their zeal and devotion for the recital of the Avesta prayers in correct orthography, and for understanding the sense thereof. There may be numerous editions of prayer books with incorrect pronunciations prevalent among the Parsis, yet the demand for Eleventh Kavasji Kanga's publication with correct pronunciation has remained constant, inasmuch as the Parsis look upon Eleventh Kanga's editions as the standard prayer books in point to pronunciation. The final proofs of the last edition of this book, as well as of recent editions of Yasht Ba Mani and Gatha Ba Mani of my late revered grandfather, were gone through by our well-known Avesta Pahlavi scholar Ervad Bomani, Nastarawanji Drabar M.A., who has always obliged me by his help. This time he was not able to help me owing to cataracts in his eyes. Another Avesta Pahlavi scholar was approached by me, who, willingly complying with my request at the sacrifice of his time, went through all the final proofs of this edition, for which act of his courtesy and kindness my thanks are due to him. Navroji Pestonji Kavasji Kanga, Bombay, August 1936. Preface to the 5th edition. The first edition of my Khordah Avesta was issued in 1880 of the Common Era, and the last in 1896. The rapid sale commanded by those editions is an unmistakable proof of the general desire on the part of my co-religionists to recite their prayers according to the correct and authenticated text, and to know their meaning. In placing this 5th edition before the public, I have thoroughly examined the text and interpretations given in my former editions, and made alterations and modifications where necessary in the light of my continued studies. The present revised edition has been enlarged by the addition of the Siroza Yasht, the Afghans, and the Pazend Nirong, recited at times after the prayers, and Amanajat by the late Mullah Firaz with their translations. Kavasji Edulji Kanga, Bombay, February 1902. Now, Afghan could be where we get the word Africa in part, because Africa certainly wasn't the self-designated title for Africa. And I think just like Asia, it was part of, only referred to part of things. Preface to the 4th edition. This is the 4th edition of my Khordah Avesta. The 4th edition of my Khordah Avesta has been enlarged by the addition of 2 new yashts, viz. Khorshid and Ma, and the Avesta and Pazen chapter, Khordah, recited in memory of departed relatives, has been inserted with its translation. The translation and notes have been carefully revised in the light of further study and research. I have carefully perused the latest edition of Professor Darmester's French version of the Avesta, and gleaned from it useful matters, and inserted it in the work in the shape of footnotes. The passages of the Gathas occurring in the Khordah Avesta have been reproduced in the form of verse, besides many other matters which can suitably find a place in a work of this kind have been added. In short, an earnest endeavor has been made to improve and enlarge the work and bring it up to date, with a view, however, to place it within the reach of all classes of my co-religionists. No increase has been made in the price of the book, which, as in the case of the last 2 editions, has been fixed at 2 through 8 rubles answered per copy. I beg to acknowledge the obligation I owe to the esteemed trustees of the Sir Jamsetji Gigi Boy Translation Fund for their support by subscribing for 60 copies of this work. Kavasji Edulji Kanga, Bombay, March 1896. Preface to the 3rd edition. Before I go on, an important thing that I've noticed is that it seems that as far as prayer books go, the Persians and the Arabs are at least referring to sources in Persian race languages or Arab race languages. The Muslims do better than the Jews, but still the Jews do better than the Christians. I mean, as a group, there may be some exceptions somewhere, but yeah, I just thought to point out that I personally found that to be the case. More varied, not just some doctrinal. This is what to read on on this Sunday and that sort of thing. It's more profound than that, I think, and we'll see as we go on here, but we're not going to see the text here because I'm not sure of the printing. The rapid sale in the short space of 2 years and a half of the 2nd edition, revised and enlarged, of this work affords evidence at once satisfactory and gratifying of the utility and appreciation of the book, and of the growing taste for a correct and intelligent reciting of prayers among the Parsi community. In the present edition, 2 yashts, viz. Tir and Ghosh, have been added to the 10 given in the 2nd edition, the number of yashts in this edition being thus 12 in all. I may add that following the new edition of the Avesta text, published by Dr. Karl F. Geldner, I have altered in many places certain Avestaic words, which appeared to me in the course of my study of that book to admit my corrections, and with the view of affording facility of reference to Avesta students, I have numbered the paragraphs in my text and translation as Dr. Geldner's text. The translation is also in some places undergone revisions and improvements suggested by further study and consideration of the Avesta literature. Kavasji Edulji Kanga, Bombay, July 1890. Preface to the 2nd edition. The 1st edition of this Khordah Avesta was issued in 1880. To judge from the favorable reception accorded to it, 1,000 copies having been sold off and a new issue called for, the work may be assumed to have supplied a want and to be well adapted to the needs of the community for which it was intended. And it looks like part of this preface to the 2nd edition were abridged, but we don't need to repeat everything, 6 times. Passages of Avesta and Pazend, which were omitted in the 1st edition after they had been once cited, have been repeated in the present issue on every occasion on which they occur. Yeah, you don't want to be performing the prayer from a book and it's like, oh, hold on, I got to find the right page, or even remember, okay, which order is this in? It's this here, yeah, you don't want to do that. This and the addition of 3 yashts has somewhat increased the bulk of this volume, yet the price has been greatly reduced in order to place it within the reach of all sections of the community. Kavasji Edulji Kanga, Bombay, December 1887. Now, whether you agree with certain theological or points of one sort or another, or because it's all in the context of religion, we may look at some of this stuff here and say that is Yeah, if I didn't have too many books, I would want this one to be one of the books I just, carry with me. December 1887. Preface to the first edition. More than 60 years ago, a translation of the Khordah Avesta was for the first time published by the late Dustgur Framji Surabji Meherji Rana. A few months later, on another translation of the same was issued by the late Dustgur Edulji Kanga Sanjana. These translations do not materially differ from each other, but for all practical purposes, the latter, up till now, has been most in use, it having passed in the meantime through several editions with but few important alterations. Thanks, however, to the rapid but immensely satisfactory progress made in comparative philology during the last half-century by the indefatigable servants of Europe, considerable light has been thrown not only on the ancient Zoroastrian religion, as we call it, it's not the self-designated title, but on the interpretation of many a difficult passage in the Zen Avesta. Facts unknown before and excellences quite buried in obscurity have, by its aid, been brought to the surface, while some portion of the Zen Avesta, so ambiguous before, has been correctly interpreted and translated into Gujarati. These made the want of a translation of the Khordah Avesta according to the most correct rules of grammar and philology keenly felt, and I therefore undertook to supply it at the suggestion of many educated and intelligent Zoroastrians. The whole of the translation is based on Professor Westergaard's excellent Zen text. This it was at first intended to publish in Zen characters, but being aware of the inability of a great portion of my co-religionists to peruse it in Zen, I deemed it expedient to abandon the original intention and make the work more convenient and accessible by transliterating the original text into correct Gujarati. In so doing, I have had to undergo the trouble and expense of getting cast some letters and corresponding ones for which were not to be found in the Gujarati alphabet, the text divided into a number of convenient paragraphs, and each paragraph has subjoined to it its translation, and to prevent confusion, types in black pica have been thoroughly employed for the text, and ordinary pica for the translation. In the translation, the twofold end is observed of making it useful both to Zen students and to the general readers. It is kept as much as practicable close to the text, each word of which is distinguished by a number corresponding with that placed over its translation immediately below. Words not occurring in the original but necessary to complete the sense of the translation are placed in parentheses. In many of the substances, one or more of the paragraphs is summarized by way of explanation and placed below in literal translation. Besides the correct text in its translation referred to above, the following important points are attended to. Careful attention is paid to punctuation, for want of which gross mistakes often arise. Zen text is, in order to avoid confusion, separated and pointed out distinctly from the Pazen text and the text composed at a later period. Special care is taken to point out the passage taken from the Yasna, Mispered, and Vendadad. Pazen passages are, as far as practicable, compared with their corresponding Zen passages. Subjects cursorily treated in the Khordah Avesta, but discussed at great length elsewhere, here are amplified with fuller information from other sources. Technical terms of Zoroastrian ceremonials and ethics, such as Hom, Jivam, Barsam, Zor, Chinvat Bridge, and so on, are fully explained. Passages treating the excellence and efficacy of the prayers, Yatha and Hashem, are called and fully explained. Pahlavi translation is sometimes indented upon, as in the case of Atash Nyayesh. References to parallel Zen passages, as in the case of the translation of Patet Pashamani, which is holy in Pazend are given with their meanings and explanations, and in several places where it is found necessary, additional information from Pahlavi commentators is given in footnotes. Certain ceremonials required to be observed in several places during prayers are explained. Requisite information is given about the Gahambars and their proper seasons on the authority of the Avesta. The Pazend Confession of Faith, which is generally recited at the end of the prayers, is substituted by a far better one, and that too found in the Zend, which I trust will be appreciated by my co-religionist. Well, there's more real religious authority to that one, but not traditional authority. The Confession of the Faith constitutes the 12th Ha of Yasna. In conclusion, I offer my deep and most grateful thanks to Mr. Khordah Rustamji Kama, a respected citizen and well-known Oriental scholar, and my own learned preceptor. With that kindness and good nature which are so characteristic of them, and which are invariably warn him the esteem and affection of his private pupils, he has most cordially rendered me in the presence of this work, as that of the previous ones, very valuable assistance. My obligations are due to him for his many sensible and practical suggestions for the improvement of this work. Lastly, I trust in the indulgence of the reader to overlook any inaccuracies or defects which may have crept into the translation. Comment any issues with that. Notwithstanding all the care and attention bestowed on it, a list of the several Oriental works provided